Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadyasya Yato Anvayaditaratascha Artheshu Abhigyaswarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yatsuraya Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargom Risha Dhamna Swena Sada Nirastakohakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Nigamakalpataror Galitam Phalam Shukamuka Damrita Drava Sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. We now enter the 74th chapter of the 10th Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we saw that Jarasandha was killed, and after that, the kings who were liberated, they glorified Krishna, and then Krishna came back with Arjuna and Bhima back to Indraprastha. Now Shuka Brahmarishi continues and he says, Yudhishthira was of course highly delighted to hear that Jarasandha has been killed, and he was the last remaining obstacle for his Rajasuya sacrifice that's been removed by Krishna's grace. So he beautifully glorifies Krishna. He says, O Lord Krishna, everyone starting from Brahma, they come to bow their head to you whenever they get the rare opportunity to see you, and yet you are coming to carry out such great services for us, which is unthinkable. We are actually sometimes even conceited to think that we are the king and so on. And yet, despite our shortcomings, you come here, you submit to our authority, and you go and act on our behalf, and you carry out our commands. This is all completely beyond any explanation. We cannot fathom this because this is completely inconceivable for us. So you are simply playing this Leela. That's all I can see. And then he says, just as the sun, whether it rises or it sets, whether the sun is coming in the morning, going in the evening, whatever the sun is doing, it remains actually the same. So we say the sun is setting, the sun is rising, the sun is harsh, the sun is not. But in reality, the sun never is either enhanced or does it go down. Similarly, he says, your glory is unaffected, it's always shining, and you are one without a second. And therefore, he says finally that all thoughts of diversity, like I and mine, and you and yours, are only among the ignorant, but such crooked definitions or divisions are not found even in your devotees, what to speak of you. He says, Navai te ajita bhaktana mama ahamiti madhava tvam tava iti cha nanadihi pashunamiva vaikrita. He says, O Madhava, O Supreme Lord, O Krishna, O Ajita. Ajita is another beautiful name which means one who is unconquerable. And he uses this word particularly because we see how Krishna, who is unconquerable, is actually conquered by love. So the only way he can be conquered is by love. And because the Pandavas are so loving and so humble and so surrendered, Krishna comes down to even execute commands on behalf of Yudhishthira. So he who is unconquerable is conquered by love. So that's why Yudhishthira is calling him O Ajita, O unconquerable Lord. Even your devotees do not have mine and I. Bhaktanam na mama ahamiti madhava. Even your devotees don't have mine and I, or you and yours. What to speak of you? So in this way, he glorifies Krishna. And then, with Krishna's consent, after they all go into the kingdom and settle down, Yudhishthira finds an auspicious hour for starting the Rajasuya sacrifice. So he consults with the Brahmanas who are well versed in Vedas to officiate as priests, and he fixes the hour for the Rajasuya sacrifice, which is the biggest sacrifice a king can do to declare that he is the supreme emperor of the land. So when this particular sacrifice is fixed and it's supposed to start, all the great sages come because every sage is invited. So you'll see the list, it will be the who's who of all Vedic rishis. It says Dvaipayano, who's Vyasa, Bharadwaja, Sumantu, Gautama, Asita, Vasishtha, Chavana, Kanva, Maitreya, Kavasha, Tritha, Vishwamitra, Vamadeva, Sumati, Jaimini, Kratu, Paila, Parashara. Parashara is the father of Vyasa. Garga, Vaishampayana, Atharva, Kashyapa, Dhaumya, Rama. Rama here refers to Parashurama, who is also a sage. Bhargava, which refers to Shukracharya. And in this way, all the great sages are invited. And not only that, from Hastinapur, he invites everyone there as well. So Dronacharya, Bhishma, Kripacharya, Dhritarashtra, along with their sons, Duryodhana and so on, everybody is invited to this great sacrifice. And everyone has come, all the princes, all the businessmen, all the members of the various classes of society, they are all invited. And then the priests plowed the sacrificial ground. So they used plows of gold. And with that, they plow the land and they initiate Yudhishthira as the main sacrificer, known as Yajman. He is the head of the Yajna. Head of the Yajna is called Yaj, means to sacrifice. Yajman means one who heads the sacrifice, and that's Yudhishthira. And then various golden utensils were all brought, and all the great celestial beings also descend and they all approve of this great sacrifice. And everybody is so happy to see Yudhishthira doing this because they all feel that he is the most qualified to perform this very rare sacrifice, especially because he is a devotee of Krishna. That is the biggest qualification for Yudhishthira more than anything, and for all the Pandavas. And therefore they all feel he is highly qualified. And then the yajna goes, and then the most important climax day comes when the special extract of the yajna called soma juice has to be offered, and it has to be offered to the one who is given the first place of honor. So Yudhishthira has to offer it to one who is the first place of honor among all the guests. So now there is a question, because all the great sages have come. We saw Vishwamitra, Vasishtha, Vyasa, Parashara, everyone is a great being who has come there. All the celestial beings have come. So everyone is wondering and guessing about it. But of course, in reality, there is nothing to guess here, because clearly Krishna is the supreme being who is himself taken a human form sitting there. Even though Krishna takes the position of humbly serving the sages and so on, and that is why many were confused. But in reality, all the sages know who is Krishna. So to clear the confusion, Sahadeva spoke. Sahadeva is the last Pandava. So we see the order as we know is Yudhishthira, then Bhima, then Arjun, then Sahadeva. And Sahadeva is actually the wisest of all. He is actually the most enlightened, it is said. He is very well versed in the Vedas. He is very well learned, and he is the most wise in every sense of the word. All the Pandavas are very wise and very valorous, but even among them, Sahadeva is the wisest. And so he speaks very clearly, and he says, in my opinion, Krishna is the best man in this assembly, and of course he only deserves the first place of honor, because all of time, space, wealth, whatever there is, it is nothing but him. He says very simply and beautifully, Arhati hi achyutaha shreshtyam bhagavan satvatam pati yeshavai devataha sarva deshakala dhanadaya. He says deshakala dhana, that is all of space, all of time, all of wealth, is he alone. Satvatam pati means the head of all devotees, the crown jewel of Yadus, Krishna. And not only that, he says the whole universe is his manifestation. Every single sacrifice is his manifestation. He is the fire, he is the oblation, he is the form that is revered in all the mantras, and he is both the destination of path of wisdom and action. So it's a very beautiful verse. He says, Yad atmakam idam vishwam kratavascha yadatmakaha agnirahutayo mantraha sankhyam yogascha yat paraha. So Sankhya and Yoga are the two ways given even in Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says there are two ways established, and one is Sankhya and one is Yoga or Karma Yoga. So Sankhya is inquiry and Karma Yoga is action without attachment, and both lead to the same destination. So here Sahadeva says that that destination that both lead to is Krishna, who is the embodiment of the very universe, and therefore all sacrifices and everything there is. And he is one without a second. Again, he says the same. Eka eva advitiyaha. It's a very famous Vedic expression also. And it is repeated here. Sahadeva says, he is one without a second. Eka eva advitiyaha. One and no two here, because Krishna alone manifests as the whole universe, as everyone, everything there is. And therefore he alone, out of his own energy, creates, sustains, and dissolves this universe by his own will. So as given many times in Bhagavatam, just as a spider spins a web out of its own body, maintains the web for some time, and then dissolves it back into its own body, similarly the Supreme Lord spins out the whole universe out of himself, maintains it in himself, and dissolves it within himself. And therefore Sahadeva says, it is he alone who is manifest as the energy, Prakriti, which makes every living being and every object manifest. And therefore it is his grace alone that makes people engage in all pursuits of life. So I propose that Krishna should be offered the foremost honor, being the greatest of the great. By honoring him, we have honored all the beings as well as our own self. So that's the nice conclusion. He says, Tasmat Krishnaya Mahate Diyatam Paramarhanam Evam Chet Sarvabhutanam Atmanascha Arhanam Bhavet. So he says, therefore, Tasmat Krishnaya Mahate Diyatam, the greatest of all is Krishna, and he ought to be the one who receives honor. By doing so, we actually honor everyone and our own self, because as already mentioned, everyone and including our own self is simply an expression of Krishna himself, the Supreme Being himself. And therefore he says, as the last verse, Sahadeva says, anyone who wants to embrace infinity, it's a very nice expression. He says, anyone who wants to embrace infinity should make all offering to Krishna, who is the self of all beings, and who views everything as the same, and who remains always perfect and equanimous. He says, Sarva Bhutatma Bhutaya, Krishnaya Ananya Darshine, Deyam Shantaya Purnaya, Dattasya Anantam Ichchata. So Anantyam Ichchata means one who wants to embrace the infinite. So if you want to recognize the infinite, then you have to surrender to Krishna, who is Shantaya, peace itself, Purnaya, complete himself, Ananya Darshine, one who does not see other. So it's a very beautiful expression. Ananya Darshine means the one who does not see other. He sees only himself in everyone and everything, and that is Krishna. And therefore he says we ought to honor him alone. And when Sahadeva spoke this way beautifully, everyone became silent. The whole assembly was in silence and awed by this beautiful talk. And then finally the sages all applauded, saying, very well spoken, well spoken. It's like they say sadhu, sadhu, like say I. And so everyone was happy to hear this. And Yudhishthira was also very happy to hear this talk of his own brother. So with overwhelming emotion, Yudhishthira honored Krishna by offering him the honor of the first man in the assembly. He washed the feet of Krishna along with his brothers and Draupadi and ministers, and sprinkled those waters, the drops of that water, on his own head. And thereby he presented the Lord with yellow silk garments, and with eyes full of tears he honored the Lord. And seeing this, everybody was so moved, and they all joined their palms in reverence, and they all said Namo Namo Jaya Jaya. That is, Namo Namo means salutations, Jaya Jaya means victory, victory unto you. So it says Namo Jaya iti nemastum ne nipetuhu. So they were all chanting Namo Namo Jaya Jaya. In this way everybody was very happy. But there was one exception, and that was Shishupala. So as we can recall, Shishupala was the prince who was supposed to marry Rukmini, and his Rukmini's brothers, rather, headed by Rukmi, wanted Shishupala to marry Rukmini, but of course Krishna came and took her away after Rukmini herself sent a letter to Krishna through a sage. So Shishupala was defeated and sent back, and from then on he has been nursing his enmity and envy towards Krishna. And now he is also in this assembly because all the princes are invited. Now Shishupala gets up, he is enraged that everybody is glorifying Krishna, and he is given this high honor. Everyone in this assembly is happy except him. So he spoke very harsh words. He said, "O leaders of this house, it's certainly true that time does weird things, because I can see here how, due to the effect of time, all the wise and elderly people here are all prattling like children." He uses very harsh words. He will speak very harshly because he sees all the sages and all the great kings, everyone is honoring Krishna and he's not able to stomach it. So he says, all the wise and elderly people are all speaking like children prattling. You are the best judge to decide who has to be honored, but you should not accept the childish talk of Sahadeva that Krishna is alone worthy of honor. Look around, this assembly has so many great sages, men of great austerity, great learning, sacred vows, men who are sinless, and you have instead picked this cowherd man. So, this is how, when one is courting destruction, they start speaking like this. It is said that Vinasha Kale Viparita Buddhi, that is, when destructive time comes, when the time of destruction comes, the intellect goes crazy. So that's what happened to Shishupala. So he said, look at this, ignoring all the other leaders, you have picked this cowherd man. What claim does he have to have this honor? He is a disgrace to his own clan and his family. It is like giving the highest honor to a crow because he is beyond the pale of all dharma. So he is starting to abuse Krishna in very harsh ways, and he is seeing every Leela of Krishna, which is all so glorious and beautiful, with his colored, jaundiced eyes in a negative way. So he says he was only a cowherd boy. He is truly not even a king. It is not clear whether he is a cowherd man or a king because he is doing both. And he is beyond the pale of all dharmas because everybody knows that Krishna sported with all the gopis and so on. All these wonderful leelas of loving exchanges is not understood by those who are envious. So he says he is beyond the pale of dharma. He acts against Vedic injunctions. He is devoid of virtues. How can he be given the honor of first place? His people are also not worthy of being honored in Dwaraka. Mathura is a very sacred place. He deserted it and went to this western seaboard in this place called Dwaraka, and there is no Brahmanas living there, and they live like pirates there, and so on and so forth. So he was talking in very harsh, very mean words, and everybody there was exhausted. They thought he will shut up, but he kept going on and on and on with his harsh words. But Krishna, of course, simply remained there smiling. It is said that just as a lion does not bother with the howls of a jackal, Krishna remained simply silent and with a graceful smile on him. But those who were there, they couldn't bear the vilification of the Lord. So either they closed their ears or they left the hall instantly, because it is said that when one casts aspersions on the Supreme Being or even his devotees, one ought to not be in that place. So it is generally a good injunction that we ought to never be in a place where bad things are spoken, especially about the Supreme Lord or those who are surrendered unto Him. So if we can stop them, we should stop them. Otherwise, we should just leave the place. So bearing this in mind, many started leaving. Meanwhile, the Pandavas got up because it is their court, and they decided to finish off this Shishupala. So they took their weapons out. And when they took the weapons out, Shishupala also took his sword and shield out ready for a fight. So Krishna observed all this, and then he gave a sign to the Pandavas to settle down. And then Shishupala started cursing more. And then there was a certain count. So Shishupala had a curse. This was all prophecy, because it was said that Shishupala can use curses against Krishna 100 times, and after that he'll be killed. Shishupala had lost count. He was cursing, so Krishna was simply there and not doing anything till he cursed 100 times. And when he crossed the 100th time, then Krishna took his discus, the glorious Sudarshana chakra, and he sent it out, and instantly his head was chopped off and Shishupala was beheaded. And everybody was celebrating this. There was a tumultuous uproar in the assembly. They were shocked to see this, but they were also very happy. But then the most amazing thing is to happen now. What happened was, after Shishupala fell down, it is said that a column of light came out from his own body, Shishupala's body, and everybody could see this column of light travel in that assembly and reach Krishna's heart and merge in it. So, this is the glory of Krishna killing and liberating all the demons. Shishupala is especially special because it was already mentioned in the seventh skandha, for those who can recall, that Shishupala and Dantavaktra are none other than Jaya and Vijaya. So the two doorkeepers, Jaya and Vijaya, because of a transgression they made, they were given this curse of being born on earth 3 times as the enemy of the Lord and get killed by him and then reach back to him. So the first time they were born as Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha, and as we saw, Hiranyakashipu was killed by Narasimha and Hiranyaksha was killed by Varaha. Then they were born as Ravana and Kumbhakarna, and they were both killed by Lord Ramachandra. And then now in the final incarnation, they were born as Shishupala and Dantavaktra. So Shishupala, this is the last life for him. So therefore he essentially went through what was ordained for him to get liberated. So all his evil actions were only his way of getting liberation. So when he was killed, that was the end of his births, and he merged within the Supreme Being. So this is another lesson why we cannot judge anyone, because Shishupala, who seems like the most vile person, in fact was liberated because of all these actions. So that's why Shuka Brahmarishi says, one who contemplates exclusively on the Lord, even if those thoughts of exclusive focus are filled with anger or even hate, they are filled with the thought of the Lord and thereby they are liberated. So there are many who are very indifferent and they simply go about life without any thought about any kind of inquiry. But then there are those who go out of their way to deny, and they are obsessed with this idea of denying God. And even such people are better off in a way than those who are completely indifferent, because when one is obsessed with it, he is consumed with the thought. And there is an inquiry that goes on because of this obsession. So, similarly, here also, Shishupala, because he was obsessed with anger and hate towards Krishna, he had nothing other than Krishna to think about. And because of this, he attained this glorious liberation, it is said. So, Shishupala's deliverance was made in this way. And then after that, Yudhishthira gave sacrificial feasts to all the priests and everyone very liberally. And he performed all the ablutions necessary to complete the sacrifice properly according to scriptural injunctions. So in this way, Rajasuya sacrifice was finished, and meanwhile Shishupala was also given this ultimate deliverance. And then Krishna stayed for a few more months at Indraprastha, and then after that, even though Yudhishthira would not want him to go, he was reluctant. Krishna eventually left for Dwaraka with his ministers and everyone. So in this way, Shuka Brahmarishi concludes this chapter by saying, again recalling how Sanaka and the brothers had cursed Jaya and Vijaya, the attendants of the Lord at Vaikunta, and that is why they had to take these 3 birds, which we already narrated. And so this was the last, and therefore Shishupala was killed. Dantavaktra is yet to be finished off. We'll see that soon. He was none other than Hiranyaksha and then Kumbhakarna. Now he is Dantavaktra. So in any case, he narrates that. And then Shuka Brahmarishi concludes by saying that after finishing all the ablutions, Yudhishthira was shining like Indra and everybody honored him. There was only one person who was envious of all this other than Shishupala. Shishupala was envious of Krishna being the first man of honor, and therefore he was enraged and he was liberated in that way. But there was another, as we can guess, Duryodhana, who was also there. He had no problem with Krishna being honored, but his envy was towards Yudhishthira, because Yudhishthira, who is his cousin, was being glorified by everyone as the supreme emperor whom he had tried to kill in the past. So he was filled with envy and he couldn't bear the sight of all this royal splendor of Yudhishthira and the Pandavas because of his sinful nature. So that's how Duryodhana alone is still there, feeling this negative emotion. But meanwhile, everybody is happy and everybody is very joyfully also relating the Leelas of Krishna, how he killed Jarasandha first so that Rajasuya sacrifice can happen, and then how Shishupala was killed during the sacrifice, and how thereby Rajasuya sacrifice was completed. And listening to this is a very auspicious incident in Krishna's Leela, which even Bhishma refers to in his Stuti in the first Skandha. So, with this narration of the Rajasuya sacrifice, Shukra Brahmarshi concludes this chapter. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.